Welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 339. My apologies on the delay. It turned out I had a technical issue and it stopped my rebroadcast. And as we're coming up online with everybody, still bit rate issues, but I think we're picking it up. There we go. Yes, we had a surge in, or a lack of surge, I guess, in connectivity. And I was having a problem bit rate and the reshare program wasn't turning on. Yes, technical blah, blah. But I'm so thankful I get to be on. Thank you so much for being patient with me. For those that were knocking eagerly for the show to start, thank you. I always appreciate that. And welcome everyone globally around the world, 39 countries and counting. And for watching us on our TV channel, I'm actually getting some neat feedback from people that are seeing it on our TV channel, Hospitality Channel. Thank you so much for that. One dive into it. One topic, 1 hour. Don't want to use the whole hour. Well, maybe we'll use the whole hour. It really depends if any questions pop up and so forth. I have changed the format a little bit because the chat room, with the one here, I get more chats off of the social media side. So I'm going to kind of keep an eye on that as we go through this to make sure I'm not missing anybody that's giving some feedback. And as always, welcome to everyone that watches us live on all of the platforms that we simulcast on, which was our technical issue today. It wasn't turning on as it normally does. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, on and on. So for that reason, let me go and change layout here. Just make sure I'm not missing anything in this side. There we go. Thank you for joining. So today's topic, analytics versus reporting. You've heard me beat this kettle drum many, many times that there's a big gap on what people understand reporting is versus analytics. They often put them in the same context by saying that I've generated this report or I've made that report for something or other. And I've often contended, we've had many discussions about the value of analytics, which is really taking what the data in the report is and determining its value and use to interpret it, to understand it. That's a very simplistic reference to the polarity of reports versus analytics because you're making a base assumption that the reports have the information that you need and were developed in such a way that the information has the validity to be actionable so that you can report information that can be used for action, which is the ultimate purpose of reports. Reports have two value propositions to them: forensics, which is past tense, understanding what happened, and predictive, which is using information to better understand what to do in future tense. This will be a key element of our discussion today, the differences of forensic reporting analytics and predictive reporting and analytics, because they have two different purposes to that. First, let's see a little bit of history of within hospitality, how reports and analytics work. There is, well, there's the shiny object syndrome when it comes to reports. Ownership and management love reports. They love having information together. Now, you would assume or understand that reports are useful to owners and managers to be able to understand the metrics of their business, how things are trending and working. There are many variations to the value, the data sourcing of the reports that owners and managers use. You have rent and renew management reports. You have operational stability reports. You have accounting, collections, cash flow reports. There's lots of sources of reports based on the value of the data that they're providing and for the purpose of why it's being provided for. For that reason, you have a lot of interpretation as to why reports are generated. And again, owners and managers love reports. They also, going back to the shiny object perspective, is they like platforms that offer more accurate or more useful reports, is the way they see it. They go for the shiny object aspect of this. I refer to this a lot of times as reports that say green good, red bad, up good, down bad. They are used oftentimes to do snapshot reviews. They're not really looked at in depth. They are looked at as a pace report in the sense of where they think they are under the health of whatever that data is. I know it sounds very obscure, but let me give you a specific reference to this. For those that look at star reports, you don't look at the whole report. Even the at a glance tab is often at a glance only a small piece of it. Depending upon the metrics that have been decided in the company that are important, RevPAR or occupancy and or ADR, that's where your eyes gravitate to on these reports. If it's a RevPAR number that you're always being asked about, or a RevPAR number that you are needing as a metric for whatever conversations you have, Your first look at star reports is at a glance RevPAR, you against market set, you against historical. And that tells you whether you're going to have a good conversation when it comes up, or where it always gets come up, or a bad conversation when it gets brought up, as to whether you are at or below or above the expectations. But that's just a report that doesn't dive into using the analytics, the value of that, the trending of it. Did you just attain your level? Did you maintain your level? Are you below your level? What is the reasons why your RevPAR is off? It is that you went for more occupancy and less ADR. You went for more ADR and less occupancy. There's a depth to reporting that is analytics. Now, in our example of Star Report, you're looking forensically. What did we do? Now, this is very useful for determining, did our previous strategies eh, garner the results we did them for? So, forensic reporting and then hence analytics from reports are very valuable to make sure that you are making good guided decisions. Predictive data and analytics reporting um, is more about understanding and interpreting what is being made visible now to know whether or not you need to make decisions for future tense. So you're always in the economic bubble. I don't know for anybody that went to college for economics or had to take an economics class if they were at college, and even in high school, economics in general, just the topic of economics always goes to the idea that if all things were constant, we're going to look at this one variable. But the reality of it is, and they self proclaim this when they say this strategy, is that all things aren't constant. So looking at this one variable, ignoring all others, which is the constant perspective, is useful. Yes, it is, because you're really just looking at one thing. Um, but it isn't realistic in its interpretation of use. You can't make decisions on just the one thing you're looking at, ignoring all the other things that also influence it, which unfortunately ownership and management sometimes tend to do in their granularity of looking. They look at a report for a single value proposition and they make decisions on that value proposition's relevance, ignoring the fact that it is not functional to make those decisions without adding other variable data sources in to say, well, this is great. We want to do this with this one thing. We're going to increase RevPAR. But what really is happening in our market? Are we losing market share? Are we not marketing to get our percentage of voice? Is there a new competitor in market? Are we not pricing ourselves in the market sensitivity of demand? So there's other things that go on with this decision. Just, well, we want to increase RevPAR. Sometimes, based on the diversity of ownership and management's all these things that they're doing, they tend to make what I consider to be snap decisions based on single point data. RevPAR is down. Go fix it. I want you to jack ADR. Mm. That sounds great. In your knowledge of how this works, and it can be very valuable knowledge, you think push that button and it's going to solve that particular issue. Problem is, ADR can't be yielded because there's a lack of demand to market. You have a comp set that's underpinning your price strategy. You have better product to market, and the honeymoon period with them is diluting your demand that you historically had. There's lots of things that change the value of those kind of forensic decisions. So there's a forensic perspective, historical data, and the validation of strategies and or things that we should be seeing are lending itself to future decisions. And then you have proactive decisions going forward. Now, when I say shiny object thing, there's a lot of service providers out there that are constantly improving their UI, user interface, with their products to make it prettier, shinier, sexier, lipstick kind of thing. And it sells more usages to other ownerships when they see a report that's like, hey, rather than look at a bunch of numbers, this gives you great little people pointing up saying your numbers are going up and they're green people. And so green is good and pointing up is good. And red people pointing down are bad. And they buy into it because they, one, have lots of reports to look at. Two, they don't want to know how the hot dog is made. They just want to love hot dogs. Okay. So they just want the thing that they think they need to know about. There is a dark side to reporting that we've mentioned in other shows before, and that is reports for report's sake. I know from a property level, when I was at property level, I always was very aggravated by the persistent and expansive demands from corporate on the number of reports that we needed to provide to them. Often, and I've heard this many times when the roles reversed and I was at corporate, that I could spend all my day just reporting to you what we should be doing while not getting it done. And that is one of those things of report paralysis that comes out of this, that you're so caught up with a death of a thousand cuts. This department of corporate wants these reports. This department of corporate wants these reports. This department of corporate wants these reports, and these department wants. And so you're trying to satisfy all the demands of those, but in fact, you're spending more time on reporting what to do that you're actually not doing the work. Um, this has even been exacerbated more in our current environment with COVID, with our staffing levels being at such a critical low level, that we don't even have the extra hands to help us with this. You may not have a DOS, director of sales, to handle the sales requirement reports that corporate is asking for. You may not have a marketing director or a revenue manager. You might have to be sharing a revenue manager, or there might be centralized third party revenue management where if you're asking for them to handle these reports from corporate, you're paying them more money to do so, even if they're willing to. Um, these things don't work functionally, and so corporate has to understand what they truly need is information versus just stacking reports on top of another report request and so forth. That being said, not reporting is much worse than over reporting. Not reporting means that you're making decisions in a bubble. You're doing it on opinion and insight and just gut feelings. And although you may be very good at what you used to do, those gut feelings and interpretations not based on data are really risky decisions. Some people do a phenomenal job on being able to make interpretive decisions without data because they are familiar enough with historical trend to see the things that they see in a way that makes them able to make decisions that they feel are comfortable. Just asking about this in the stock market. But the really successful decision makers base it on the data that they get and how that data is used. And to kind of explain this in a little bit more detail, um, there is reports that are generated for the purity of having a shiny report. The report gets made, it gets put on the shelf. We have a report. It's right there. Go get it. Hey, do you have a report on that? Yes, I do. Let me email that to you or share that with you. And it's a mea culpa. Okay, check the box. You asked the report. I got the report. If you ever need that information, here it is. The first question about it is that information being used? If it's just a report to have a report, and I've seen plenty of those, it's useless and cost ineffective and everything else. Now, if the data is being used, that's great. But here, let me add the condition. How is the data accumulated? Um, I use a lot of tools. In today's podcast, I'm going to go over some of these tools on garnering data for trends, how to see into the data that's out there, and to find your own data based on what your decision processes are. Um, for that reason, I often question reports that are generated as to one, the source of their data, two, the statistical relevance of their data, and three, what gets done with that data to be asking that question. To go backwards in that perspective, I have a very fundamental idea of data use. It goes to how I create surveys. It has to goes to asking questions. I put everything about this research, both forensic and predictive, with the first thing of what would I do with the answer I'm trying to find. It to me, it's almost it is the horse and then the cart, um, because you can ask, oh, we can of what if questions. How about this? And I have been and still am persistently lost in painting myself in a corner where it's just like going to the internet and you go to search for something. You want to buy AA batteries, and you end up going and booking a room at a hotel for vacation 6 months from now. You didn't. How do you put batteries to vacation? Because you don't look linearly. Our world is not a linear world anymore. Our world is a spherical one that we focus in a direction on. But to get there, we're oftentimes in many different directions, many different tangents. Me being tangent prone, as you can tell by the show many times, I can get lost in. I wanted this answer. This is what I wanted. I wanted to understand who was coming to the market at this time of year for what reason. And then I went off on a whole nother tangent of weather patterns for a region based on flight lift. It's kind of what I was looking for, but it wasn't where I wanted to end up at. So for me, it's very critical to know what I would do with the answer that I'm about to ask for. And that keeps you focused because as you begin to research, truly research data analytically, you can easily see, whoa, I didn't know that. Wow, we could use it for that. If that data was that, and all of a sudden off you go, off into a tangent on the side, and you're not getting to what started the process, which is I needed this answer over here. I don't want to go to option X. I want to stay on item Y. This is the one I want. This is the answer I have. So when I say all of the things you do for forensic and productive data, it's about knowing what you would do with the answer, not the answer itself. Okay. The answer itself is this is the demographic, this is the geography from its source, this is their price resistance, this is their makeup and incomes necessary to know what you're going to be spending for marketing on what channel to get them business. That's the answer. The purpose of why you're asking that is what to do with that answer, and that is to make this X amount more revenue based on targeting this type of information that we would then use from it. That's the usage of it. That's the key element to any data and reporting. Reports are only as good as the data that's used, the confidence of the data that's used, and most importantly, how that data gets actioned on. That only comes from analyzing the report. The report is a static entity. Analytics creates life to it. It gives the value of the data that's in the report, but that report has to use relevant data. As I mentioned before, I use lots of tools. We're going to review some of them in the podcast today, which I welcome you to listen to always. And there's sometimes how you ask the question is how you get the answer. I don't know whether you remember watching the iRobot with Will Smith, and there was a place in the movie where he was trying to understand why this certain person committed suicide, what have you, and it was about asking the right question of the software. It's not about asking a question; it's asking the right question, and that's what you're having to do with this type of data collection. If you research a term, you may think that that is the correct question to ask, when in fact, the results you get from researching that term aren't really relevant to you. Case in point, I have a hotel in the location and we're looking at competitive market set. And so I did using some of these platforms we're going to talk about it in the podcast. I wanted to look at just general geographic traffic, what people are saying related to this market, not related to hotels, not related to anything other than what are people saying about this market in general, just listening to what's being done. I'm getting everything because right now, currently, there seems to be some discussion about elevator product in this market. Bad elevators, good elevators, old elevators, historic elevators, elevator issues, elevator problems with weather. And now all of a sudden, I have all this data about elevators because that is the topic related to this market right now that the data that I asked for pulled. The data request is not, the software is not flawed. It didn't pull me incorrect data. I asked the wrong question. I needed to be more specific about what I was asking it for, which is where you go back to the what would I do with the answer should I get it? That's the key element of making sure you ask the right questions. For anybody that does ad campaigns on AdWords, I call it AdWords, sorry, Google Ads, forever be stuck with that. Um, you know that a lot of times when you do keyword research, what you think is the term that you think is the most relevant term is really a tip of an iceberg of a variety of terms and misspells and conjugations of that word or words like it or words related to it or words implied by it that have much greater traffic than what you thought was the greatest traffic keyword. And from that, you really realize how limiting your perspective of what you're looking for is. You see it in through the lens, the optics that you have, but that's not how the world sees it. Give a case in point. Um, Back when Motorola Razr phones were the thing and everybody wanted it and phone was a phone, up comes the iPhone, Apple, and everyone laughed at it as a brick. They made jokes about how just duct tape a brick to your face because that's what it looks like. It's a flat piece of glass. That doesn't look like a phone. There's no sexy angle flip open kind of, Star Trekky thing until the App Store came out. Now, up to this point, Apple and their brilliance and smartness and all the other stuff that they had built what they thought were useful apps for this phone, but it wasn't. People looked at it as like, oh, okay, so it does that. Whoopee, I don't need that. I don't need a calendar on my phone, or I didn't need whatever it is that Apple first put on the phone, the iPhone 3, or the iPhone before even the iPhone 3, until the App Store opened up, and then all of a sudden all these other variations of applications that the phone is willing to do, people were coming up with, like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if it could show a weather map on your phone to show you where you're standing versus the clouds and all that? And or if you held it up and looked at the stars in the sky and all these things that nobody had thought about at Apple to do, but opening it up to the public allowed them to do. That's literally how research happens. You go in with a supposition of what you're wanting, only to realize that your perspective is narrowcasted and that there's a wider range of how people discover the very same content that you're looking to understand. And that's where data sourcing is critical. Understanding all your resources of data. Now, these pre canned reporting programs, and there's lots of them, okay, pull what they think is information that you're most interested in using, knowing behind the scenes two realities. One, their ability to scale the software that's necessary to pull the data sources necessary to give you the results that they're selling you as a report system. Okay. And not all are the same. Some people have very limited resources, but because they put enough lipstick on the report, people buy it thinking that it's giving them accurate, actual information. Then there's less sexy versions, but they have a diversity of data that they're pulling from, but they're pulling from so much, unless you're smart enough to ask again the right question, you don't get useful information because it's too broad brushed. It's elevators. Like, okay, I get a feeling that this area has an elevator issue, or at least it's infatuated with elevators, but totally unrelated to the data I really need by asking what I was asking. So there's those polarities. There's too simplistic and limiting, and then too diverse and too in depth, um, to go over and be useful without being more skilled at pulling that data. So you need a halfway point, and a lot of platforms have come up now touting AI. And I know it's an overused term in so many ways, but I'd say advanced machine learning would be an accurate way of saying what these platforms do that help you garner data. They, just like Google has used its algorithms, uses its algorithms, these software algorithms, to try to understand why you're asking what you're asking for data. And from it, it can go to a variety of resources. I would call this your first level of data resourcing. There's platforms like Awario and TrendsWatch and so forth that are out there looking for what you said you are interested in understanding. And it will pull in everything on every platform for any reason to show you what it has. Like another platform that we're going to talk about today is Topic Mojo, where you put in topically what you're looking for, and it pulls everything from um, queries to Google to forums to videos to Twitter to Instagram to Pinterest to Reddit to TikTok to Tumblr to LinkedIn to news to traditional media mediums to actually paywall articles like New York Times and so forth, to see if your data is out there on these platforms. And then it puts it together in nice little trends. It tells you the volumes, it tells you how many in each platform were discovered, and it gives you representations of the top ones out of each of the platforms. Really cool information, but also a lot of information that you're not needing, but it makes you feel more insightful to this. Like I said, that these are ones that say we're going to look at the traditional sourcings of places and pull in all this information for you to review whether you find it useful. Um, that's the first layer. Um, the second layer is actually going and looking for specific data that you want. And there's a whole new crop of tools that have rolled out now about scraping data. It used to be you could use certain tools to take and extract data off of websites. Like if you were looking at rate websites, and you could pull off rate websites and see what the rate changes were off something. So you could begin to do that repetitively over a course of days and see how they're doing their rate shifts. Well, we get a lot of reports now that are pre-canned. OTA Insights is a phenomenal platform if you know what you're using it for and what you're looking for by using it. Using it as a reporting tool, it's like anything else. It's like it's going to tell you this stuff in general. It keeps track of all this stuff, but if you're not really understanding how to read it, it's not going to be really useful. AirDNA is an amazing platform to look at your in-market Airbnb inventory and that unconstrained demand of inventory that can come, unconstrained inventory that can come into your market when demand warrants it. It gives you a sense of rate parities and in inventory fluctuations, and also other metrics to determine your strategies against those inventories that are coming to market. It does lots of stuff if you know what to look for. That's the analytics of this. Just looking at their DNA is like, okay, cool. I need to know those little places were there, and I see the rate progress, and I see the calendar that shows, the UI calendar that shows their high demand cycles. Okay, so I can see what they're thinking they're going to get for business in my market that I'm competing with. But what do you do with it? The actual items is the key element to that. So it's important that you know that there's pre-canned data that's useful if you know what you're looking for. There is discoverable data on traditional places that will pull in all these sources and give you a resonance of what's going on. But not good questions means not good and good specific answers. And then you have the next level of data extraction, which is the targeted scraping data. This is the ones that say, I want to know what all the airlift is coming into at this particular airport. So I go out with this software and pull data off of the sites that share the data of what goes into this market on the airlift. So I can tell how many planes are coming in, how many people are on those planes, where are they coming from, what's the dates that they're coming from and to. And from that, I might have a sense of lift to my market. That extraction of data is great, but then what do? You have to put it into platforms that can use that data. Well, it used to be hard grunt work, extraction of data, putting it into a format that then gets put into a platform. That platform then derives the information that you're looking at from the correlations you've asked for. But now there's now a new generation of data that you skip the creation of taking that data and interpreting it. It tells you, pulling this data, I can put it in this format. So you can literally have the software not only extract the data, but then show you the data in a way that you would like to see it. That's a huge gap fill between how it used to be in being scraping data and how it is now, where before you had to pull the data raw and then you had to use a platform like Tableau or R or something like that to interpret the data. Well, now there's platforms that are extracting the data and giving you interpretation in a visualization kind of way. So that's great. We now have solved the perspective of gathering this data, and this data can be put into formats that we understand can be pre-canned or created. Okay. But it's the key element of action items with this. What do you do with this? And this goes back to our forensic versus proactive predictive modeling with data. Um, think of it this way: the Titanic. Forensic data, if some, the builder of the Titanic was on the Titanic, right? They've hit the iceberg, it's sinking. Forensically, the builder of the Titanic would say we should have built more lifeboats. That's looking back on what had happened, and this is the interpretation. You know what? Given the current circumstances, we should have built more lifeboats. Doesn't solve his current problem, but it helps identify what they could have done to avoid that problem. That's a great forensic value. Predictive would be, ooh, the boat's taking on water, we're sinking. We should get everyone to the lifeboats soon. That's taking current data, trend, boat sinking, water coming in. We have lifeboats. We're not going to, we should take people and get them in the lifeboats as soon as possible. That's taking current data and making predictive decision based on what I'm seeing now. We should do this now. Okay. The actualization of all this is a lot of people didn't and a lot of people passed. So, not acting on the information that was available, not seeing the data for what it was at the time that it was happening, did not prevent them from making a bad choice later, saying, I wish I was on the lifeboat. So, that's the difference between forensic and predictive. Um, Knowing what to do with the data forensically is to say we should have done this now knowing this. Predictive is we should be doing this now because of what it shows us we were aware of. Um, this lends itself to the conversation of trends. Trends like volcanoes and earthquakes, there are indications that something is going to be about happening. You look at all these people in the stock market. The adage is buy low, sell high. Buy low, sell high. Problem is, you don't know when which is which. That's why you see the volatility of a stock market, because in mass, a lot of people, like Facebook yesterday, terrible day because of lots of reasons. We can get that with the news conversation. Their stock went down. The reason why it would go back up is because people are now saying, "Oh, let me get it while the price is down," because like they're predicting, they're believing that Facebook will begin to recover from the downage, and they're going to be the recipients of benefits because they were able to buy low, and they could hopefully later sell high. The problem is that's a reactionary response to current environment. There are so many people that knew to sell when they did because they were holding it high, that they did sell it. So that's why you saw the prices go down. They knew before Facebook was reporting the numbers that made everybody else react to it that Facebook was in a position to have that happen. How? Okay. Well, it's not insider trading, it's watching trends. It's watching data related to it because you're looking for it to know to make decisions before a reactive decision is made. These are the people that make the larger money. Um, you, it's as strange as it is. I mean, even with what's going on with the NFL about how people know information before it actually turns into common knowledge. We're faced with that every day. You have people that are very. Our previous guest host Robert Cole is phenomenal with this on data research. He looks at data and says, "Woo, this is not looking good for this. This is going in the wrong direction for this or whatever." Meanwhile, everybody else is reporting clickbait headlines: "Best economy ever. This is there it is. This is this." And Robert's back there going, "Yeah, right now you're still riding the rocket burn of this, but the trend is that this bubble's going to burst, or this is going to change. This can't keep doing this." And Robert has been right more times than ever been wrong. That's for sure. Um, this predictive trending, this looking at indicators and data, there's a lot more data sources availability to this. This is when the Awarios and so forth of that pattern data poll information that you have that says, okay, let me look at these indicators. How many flights are coming to my market? Ooh, look, it's going down. Why is it going down? Is it because of season? You would know that because you have other information. Is it going down because of some news article that we have an influx of COVID in our region? Is it whatever? But understanding by looking at these indicators for the reason you want to look at those indicators to say, what does this mean? What should I take away from this? Obviously, looking backwards is hindsight's 2020. It's an old phrase that we often use. So looking at the data after it's happened and then knowing what we know how it happened when it did, okay, is history. It is often said, if you don't learn from history, it's destined to repeat itself. The mistakes you made then, if you didn't learn from them, or at least come back from a way of interpreting them, you're destined to repeat the same mistake again because you're going to act the same way the second time. Reports and analytics help with changing how you respond in future tense. Not everything can be seen. No one predicated COVID to the extent that it was. Yes, we missed early signals very at the beginning for a variety of political reasons, but nobody really, from going forward for all the things that have happened, predicted the resistance to vaccine taking from stupid people and all this other stuff. And because of that, we are in the position that we are going through the Omicrons and everything else. Vaccines were released, and yet here we are again, still a year later, doing the same things, having the same impact on our industry. There's indicators where you listen to like Bill Gates saying that back in the day that he predicted that 50% of the business travel would not return. And here, American Express just came out with a statement saying that they believe, from their perspective, that a third of the business travel will permanently never come back. We all hope they're wrong, but there's indicators that say they're more likely to be right than they are wrong at this point. These are indicators to trends. Just like a volcano, the seismometer is like, ooh, there's activity, there's more activity, there's more activity. It seems like there's a trend that this volcano is going to have something happen, it's going to erupt. That's what we do in our analytics of data. We're looking for those indicators. Well, it goes back to one of the first things I said, which was, what would you do with the answer? It's one thing to look and see the bubbles and bops of things that are going on and then try to understand why it is. Like, oh, well, that Facebook's prices went down because of their reduction in traffic day over day. The first time it went down instead of up, and so forth and so on. We can see the causation after it's apparent. But what's really rocking, which makes everybody so valuable to those that do it well, is the person a week ago that sold off their Facebook stock knowing we're going to be hitting this wrinkle and making high margin off of it. Now that the prices are low, they're taking the opportunity to pick it back up as it goes back up. They just cashed in for some nice reward, which is what the purpose of them doing that is. So same too with us for inventory to our hotels. I had very successful, and this goes back to the old school of pulling data and then putting it into a format that's understandable. I was using Tableau. We were trying to understand airlift to the airports in the market that we had the clients with. And so we started scraping data about the flights coming to that town. The first thing we learned is that it's not relevant to the geography because they were coming from other hub airports. So just because they came from Detroit didn't mean they're from Detroit, it just means they went through Detroit a lot of times. So we had to kind of step back one and say, oh, well, what are our actual feeder airports for domestic travel? We understand the international ones. I mean, if you're not in a place like Detroit, New York, Atlanta, or Miami on the East Coast, you're more, or O'Hare, excuse me, then you, depending upon the airline lift, you're looking at subsidized secondary hubs. And it's not that international travel doesn't come from other places, but they're very specific airlines. So you know from those airlines who they are, so you know where they're coming from. The domestic travel is the tough one to figure out because they come from a variety of hubs. So once you realize which hubs are used to distribute to that your geographic location, then you go to those hubs to determine what feeder markets they're marketing to. Where do the people come from to go through that hub to go to your destination? And that then correlates to your data of people looking at your websites to say, does that match? Are people from these geographic areas for the airlift coming to your hotel by looking at your hotel as well? So you begin to create these filters of whether the data is relevant or not. Anyway, what we did do was by determining the airlift, we could see, because the airports airlines control so much of supply and demand for these things, that them raising their rates for airlift didn't necessarily mean they were yielding the last few seats on a plane. Instead, they might be soliciting demand by thinking that it's getting tighter to get the flights, and people will buy out of panic that they might miss getting the lower rate before it goes even higher. That strategy works. By the same token, we could see when they added more mechanical, like more planes for that route, increase the flight schedules to get from point A to point B, which is yours, that they added more mechanical. Well, they weren't going to dedicate multi-million dollar aircraft if they couldn't sell the seats, which means that they knew preemptively that they could sell the demand that they were that for the inventory they were adding into the lift. So from those indicators, we began to basically know what demand was coming to our market. And from that, from our competitors in the market, when they started getting panicky in the book window and start lowering their rates because they didn't see the forecasted demand that they were looking for, we could hold rate integrity because we knew the inventory was coming in. So they ended up selling rooms at a lower rate, sure, but we also still were able to maintain selling our rooms at a higher rate because we knew the inventory was coming to market. That usages of reportings and analytics and data is the reason why you do that process, is to make those decisions and knowing with confidence, don't lower rate. We know we got the more additional lift coming in, and we know it's going to be coming in at a time that they're going to be wanting. So we know in our prime booking window, these people will pick their hotel selection, and or we can target these people because now that we know where they're coming from, we can dedicate our marketing to those markets. We don't have to broadcast in a variety of places. We can focus on the markets we know they're coming from and really try to increase our conversions of interest from those markets. That's when you start using data into analytics for the reports that people use to make decisions. That's the progression of how those things go forward. So um, I'd like to go back to a couple of things. I have lots of little bullet points that would be in the show notes about how I'm talking through this, and I kind of skip ahead on one, and I want to go back. There is a difference between research and trending that I want to address. Research is the definition to an answer. Trending is to understand the decisions that need to get made. If you're researching data to make a decision, you're looking from it from two perspectives. Is it validating what I'm presuming while I'm researching it? Or is it disproving what it is that I'm trying to validate? Does it basically back up what I'm saying, or does it prove what I'm saying is wrong? Unfortunately, 99% of the people that I deal with or have dealt with historically are always looking for data that supports their position to the exclusion of data that doesn't. They can be presented 20 different things, and 19 of them do not agree with what they are proposing. But the one that does is the one they hang on. Oh, well, this study, it looks like, that proves what I'm saying. But these 19 other ones didn't, and they ignore those. So I earnestly, when you do these reporting analytics and data aggregation discussions, look at making sure that the egos and the sandboxes and the hidden agendas get as removed as much as possible out of the dialogue. Data is data. Now, I'll say that with the caveat being that statistics are statistics, and you can make any statistic validate your position as long as you exclude the statistic that doesn't. So data is data as long as you include all the factors of data and not just the ones that support what you're trying to propose and ignore the ones that aren't. There's a relevancy factor. It's fun because I always use movie analogies in the Minority Report. Literally, the name of the movie is the context that I'm referring to. Most of the conversation is a majority, but there is always a minority report of discussion saying, I don't quite believe this data backs that up. Now, that creates within statistical data, for anybody that uses data stuff, confidence factors. Nothing, I wouldn't say nothing, most everything is not 100% confidence factor. There is always, maybe not 1%, 5%, 10%. But in confidence factor creation with data, you have a threshold that says above this threshold, I accept that this data is more likely to be right than it is wrong. You're not dealing in absolutes, you're dealing in probability. And usually my marker is 85%. If anything is above 85% in confidence factor of the data that I'm getting, then I believe it is more likely to be right than it is to be wrong. Doesn't mean it can't be wrong. It just means it's more likely to be right. Or this direction versus that direction really is not a right and wrong. That is the honesty of sharing your decision. It's not, oh, I'm all in for my best dang idea ever since sliced bread. That's you. Yeah, you got it. No, it's like, look, I think from all the data we're able to pull for the data we think is relevant and all the data that we wanted to understand to make sure that it was relevant to what you're asking about, and hence again, the answer before asking the question, we have a 90% confidence that it is what we think it is this way. There's still 10%. Now you may say, well, that's just so you always have an exit door. Yeah, sure, it can be used that if you use it that way. Um, there is always an improbability of going back to the economic scale. As much as you try to keep everything constant to look at one variable, it's not. So you don't know what you don't know. And there are data sources out there or things that can happen that you didn't account for in your calculation because you were unaware of it. Again, you don't know what you don't know, that influenced it in a way that 10% that said it wasn't possibly right was activated. It rained that day, so the flights didn't go out, or it snowed that day and the flights didn't go out, so the lift didn't come, so the occupancy wasn't there, and the demand wasn't there, and the prices were too high, and the people that did come in optimized the lower prices from your competitors while we're still waiting for the other plane that never showed up. It happens. The idea is that you don't crucify someone and say, well, you were totally wrong, we're going to go over and blame you for everything. All of you just knock the dust off and say, well, let's add that to our query next time. How can we take what we learned out of this to help with the second problem, which is not to have it happen again? How do we take that? We solve this current problem and more importantly, solve the future problem. So how you extract data and how you create confidences of that data is literally based on what you're looking at the data for. That is a report that's generated. And then the analytics from that is how do you look at that reported data and say, what is it that I was looking for that made me go this path? And from that, is it something that is the way I planned it? Do I need to change my strategy? And how much confidence factor do I have in that decision product? So the other admonishments to all of this is be careful of the polish of a report versus the actual meat and value of the report. I can put some lipstick on a report. I can make it look like great news, even though it's the worst news. I think of the Super Bowl commercial for the career site that I no longer remember the ad for, which lends itself to the commercials, where the guy was working in a meeting space and all of his coworkers were chimpanzees. They're talking about, and he put the chart showing the arrow down, and they were like, oh, no, 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 we don't. The monkeys were very upset, And so he flipped it so that the arrow was going up, and all monkeys are celebrating and smoking cigars and all this other stuff and making him dance. Like that's all good news. It's Be careful about polishing the interpretation of the data to the reality of the data itself. Don't get lost in the glitz of the report to notice how the report is telling you the data, how it's being represented. Going back to the statistics I was mentioning, of it's statistics. Like, you can make any statistic work in your favor just by ignoring the statistics that don't. Same too with polish over product. If you are highlighting the presentation of the data and missing the value of the data, it's not a good report and certainly not worth analyzing, or you don't want it to be analyzed because you don't want people to realize that you just sold them bad news. Um, Looking at my other items here, discovering data before it's commonly known. This is going. My point I was trying to make with when I made the statement of discovering data before it's commonly known. This is the element of predictive modeling. This is seeing trend or seeing an insight before everyone else sees it. I've told you that the three bane questions of any C-level discussion is how much does it cost, how much we're going to make off of it, and the bane of the third one is who else is doing this. Because nobody wants to be the trendsetter where there's a risk of failure, because failure means responsibility, responsibility means negative, and everyone's out to make sure that they are what I call deniable culpability, close enough for if it succeeds to be jumping on the wagon, far enough away if it blows up and fails to be able to discount yourself from having been a part of it. So when it comes to looking for insights, that's a risk aversion model that has to be decided on. How risky do we want to be? How when you're doing your own investments, you have to do an analysis of how risk prone are you. Are you more in the security of I'll be less risky and slower in my growth, but safe in doing it? Or am I willing to always throw the chips in the middle of the table when I have a pair? And that modality goes into your management style, and it goes into your leadership style, and it goes into your data collection style. If you're just looking for anything that gives you a pinpoint of light to say, oh, you know what, that seems there, they're fine. The factors of information are not completely there. The detail of making that decision is not completely there, but your gut feeling says, based on this one twinge of possibility, that's worth a chasing down. And if it fails, if you're in the position that you can absorb that kind of failure, great. But if you're not in the position to absorb that kind of failure, you're less likely to do that. You're looking for more confidence prone decisions to be your direction. Like, I don't want to be the first one doing that. Let's see what else is everyone doing. So even though you may see a trend going, wow, I think this is really going to blow up with us. I think it's really going to be a huge demand to our market. This concert that has the potential of coming in. Let me go block the rooms so that we don't get caught with people uh, fast selling our rooms at a super low rate before we realize that we could have yielded them more. Instead, you wait for it to happen and then go back, and you didn't get to stop as many many room reservations as you could have, and you put money back on the table because you reacted rather than proactively did the work that you should have done. Um, that really, let's see, define what you would do with the instrument. I got that. Separate what they do versus what you need to. Okay, like I said, I thought through this process and wanted to make sure hitting points in our conversation today. Um, you need to be fluid with your answer, not rigid. You don't need to, I need to know this exact demographic to know what exactly I'm going to do. That's a very rigid perspective. Instead, it's more of a discovery and absorption to the purpose of why you're doing this, which is who as my demographic. Why are they my demographic? Before deciding what was the ultimate purpose of this, how I can use that data to better create revenue for myself. Um, the fluidity of being adaptive, of asking the broader questions, the whys and the hows, rather than the definitive what's, helps in the process of data collection. It makes it so that you are still focused on where you're going to get, but you're very fluid as to how that you reach your end goal. You're not just blocking through walls to get to the point straight line, because a straight line means you're going to ignore other opportunities that might have been easier and or more valuable for you. So being a little bit more adaptive to how you gather data It doesn't mean you follow tangents. It just means you're more open to understanding how outside influences that you didn't start the project with might now interpret the change of how the results of the project that you're doing are. Um, Also, people get caught up in glamour data, things that validate. Remember going back to the two types of people: validating your perspective versus defying your perspective. A lot of people get caught up with looking for the glamour metrics. Look at what we did, and look at all the people that saw it. Well, that doesn't end up to your central KPI, which is how much revenue did you make from the effort. You can't bring likes to the bank. It's been an old statement for a long time. So defining the goal, defining the metric for the goal, and keeping everything that you're talking about that goal in the sense of data reporting and analytics as being relevant to that. That's a key element to the process of that. So I think rather than me rambling around, I think I've hit all the points I wanted to make today when it came to analytics and how to make sense of the noise. I'd like to recap this from a perspective of this. If reports are being generated for the purity of just making a report, that needs to stop. It's a waste of time, which is more valuable than a waste of money, but it's a waste of time. Time is the most precious commodity, especially given our labor issues. Um, with that, analytics on bad reports is just bad analytics. If you're only looking at information that has been whitewashed to lend to validating why it was being asked for, like give me a star report with a comp set that makes me look like a rock star, bad report, bad analytics, bad usage. Um, Make sure that your reports pull accurate data that is relevant to why you'd be analyzing it. Make sure it has relevancy so you have confidence in the data that's pulling. Don't get fixated with what you want the data to say, in as much as knowing that you need to interpret what the data is telling you. Don't just keep it central to your purpose of I want to prove myself right. Keep out of that. Know that trend is on the predictive side. Forensic is on the historical side. Forensic is great for extracting the interpretation of your strategy versus the knowledge base that you had at the time versus the knowledge base you have after actualization. Predictive is about understanding and listening to the data that is out there right now, garnering the data that you find would be relevant to it, and making an interpretation of what that data means for future decisions that you now need to make so you're in a better position for the future. It's not reacting to it, it's being predictive and proactive to it. So I think I've covered all my bases when it comes to analytics and so forth. From a overall perspective, we're in kind of the, I wouldn't say the doldrums of weather is the feature of our conversation when it comes to news these days. The impact of weather on travel and the ability to travel is profoundly there. That's why we don't often have a lot of conferences and such at this time of year, because it's a more of a challenge to be consistent about being able to get to locations because of the weather. We've somehow got into this trend with the news that everybody has to talk about how many millions of people these weather forecasts are affecting for dramatic effect. I find it a distraction to the fact, but I think it would be much more helpful if people talked about the individual aspects of weather when it comes to the news rather than just saying it's from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada for dramatic effect. Yes, we can see the clouds on the map. Tell us how this affects the particularities of things like this city or this region rather than the broad dramatic of how many millions of people are affected by that. That being said, we are dealing with the fact that we're in a very high research for travel time. I was not, and I mentioned this at the beginning of January, and that meta search for January was a hit or miss based upon the regionality that you represented, because a lot of time in January, given the weather changes as they are, a lot of people are just researching their future travel plans. So meta search, which is a lot about um, rate and dates and availability. Okay. Short, immediate decisions for acquisition, closer to the end of the funnel kind of process for those that are familiar with funnels. Um, that's our current time. We're now going into the pre-spring break mentality. What will people do when they have time back off again? Where will they go when they have time back off again? The improvement of weather as being a restriction to their travel come March. Other large events like basketball and the finishing of the Super Bowl this month is pretty much a very centric to one location kind of thing. But that transition to other sports being focused, there's lots of impacts to those things. The As we know, pent up demand of travel for people to make travel plans once they feel it's past the Omicron variant that they're worried about right now, to go back and do those things. So there's a lot of research now to watching trends as to what people are looking for and why, and from where are they doing it, and who are they that are doing it. That will give you an insightful perspective. So these tools that we're going to talk about in the podcast today will be hopefully helpful to those for everyone that wants to do these things. We're going to go review some that we've talked about before and new ones we haven't talked about since. That we're going to add to those discussions to help people see how they can go through the process of reports that are generated for them, research that is generated for them, and then just crack into the conversation of how they can do their own research and garner their own data based on what they're interested in particular. So I think I've pretty much hit all the things I wanted to hit today. Thank you, everyone. I said I was going to watch our simulcast stuff that people were contacting us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and I did not miss it. So everyone that just I'm looking at them saying I did not answer to you what you were doing, my apologies. I will be happy to answer, as I do always with email, lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I will also put in the show notes some answers to the questions that I see here from other places. For that, I will make sure that we're good for those things. And of course, welcome you to listening to our podcast. We do it as a follow up to this. We recap this show a little bit, but also, as I mentioned, in particular for this podcast, we're going to get into the tools we were talking about for this. And I think we're good for that. Always thank you for watching us on our TV channel, Hospitality Channel. You can find that on Roku, Apple, Google, Amazon. Just look for Hospitality Channel. The show is always on the free side of that. Of course, there is a subscription service like Netflix, $4.99 a month, where we're putting other content behind that wall, which is all about hospitality. We're not trying to be a food channel, travel channel. It's all about the hospitality industry, learning and understanding more about our industry and creating that kind of data source for everyone on their TVs. So we hope you can join us there. So with that, my name is Lauren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you next week. If you give opportunity to everyone, then everyone can benefit from the ability that everyone gets better at what they do, rather than only one can survive. Only one